So as an economist, obviously you could think that there's many reasons why productivity might decline, but I think one main underlying reason is demographic change. As the society is aging and as older workers are leaving the labor force, the total labor force in Germany and many other developed economies is expected to decline in the next decades. And to counter this effect, governments have started to invest into public services such as public childcare, after-school programs, but also commuting infrastructure, which makes it easier for workers to search for and return to the labor force. And this is particularly true for one group of workers, which has, for historical and also for care reasons, been less represented in the labor force, namely female workers and especially young mothers. So I think one part of this investment into public services, which has been less looked at in the literature, is that this is very much a local phenomenon. And I think this is true for two reasons. One of the reasons is that the financing of these local services is very local, that in a federal system such as Germany, much of the financing takes place at the municipality or county level, where they use their own funds from especially business taxation, but also funds from other places of the economy via fiscal redistribution scheme to finance these public investments. And on the other side, also the effects are very local, in that they may differ between different labor markets, in particular if the institutions behind these labor markets differ between places. And I think this is a starting point for our paper to look at how spatial redistribution affects local and aggregate labor force, but also output and welfare. So if there are these heterogeneous effects, but also heterogeneous financing between different places, then we argue that there is also the possibility for public policy, especially well-targeted spatial policy, to increase local but also aggregate outcomes such as GDP, female labor force participation, but also welfare. So in terms of methods, there's actually three parts to our paper. So in the first part, we derive a theoretical model because we want to understand what will be the impact of having localized investments into public services, such as childcare or education. And what we argue in this paper is that there's actually two effects on the labor force. One comes locally from increased labor force participation, especially of female workers, and the other one is from attracting economic activity from other places for workers who may decide to come to these regions, because now there's very affordable and high quality public services in this place. And in the second part of this paper, we want to understand what this means for public policy. So we look at how you could optimize spatial policy to kind of increase local and aggregate outcomes. And in the last part, we actually quantify this model for Germany and to understand what will be the general equilibrium effects of implementing this optimized spatial policy. And we then find very high welfare and also output gains on the aggregate. So on the one hand, we do find that on aggregate there is an increase in labor force of women, but we find that this is particularly true in the biggest and most productive places in Germany, which are big cities in southern and western Germany. And one of the reasons behind it is that we actually document that while in many rural eastern German places, labor force participation between male and female workers is almost the same, the employment gaps are actually the highest in many of these big western and southern German cities. And so there's actually the highest potential to also increase labor supply among women when investments go into some of these places. So in this paper, we actually focus on two different types of spatial policies. One is regarding the local taxation. In here, we would argue that if there's a place where the employment rate might be smaller, then especially income taxation should also be smaller in these places to incentivize workers to join the labor force. On the other side, we are talking about the spatial redistribution between different places. And here, we would argue that while most of the literature has just looked at how much to redistribute from richer to poorer areas, what we argue in this paper is that you should also keep in mind how this affects local labor force participation, especially if many of these funds go into financing local services, such as childcare, education, and commuting infrastructure.